Hello friends, Druid level nature communion. A couple of videos ago, I spoke about apophenia, our tendency to see patterns and sometimes give them meaning that perhaps they don't deserve all the time. Today, I want to talk about finding patterns, kind of the positive side of apophenia, and how we can find those in nature and really come to understand the natural world on an entirely new level. So I'm taking us into the woods, and there is obviously a lot to see out here. Last time, when I spoke about patterns, I noted how they often can lead us astray of a deeper understanding of reality. In general, all of us are struggling or on a quest, or at least interested in knowing more about reality. What in our world is real and what in our world is sort of fantasy. Not that fantasy is as bad, but if we can distinguish between the two, it can be useful. Now, if you've read Chasing Turkeys, you know that sometimes people can have a tendency to overstate my competence in general. And I'm not going to make that same mistake here in this video. So I want to be clear that I do not feel that right now I am at that Druid level of nature communion. But there are a few times when I have felt it. So again, in the story, towards the end, when I'm chasing the turkey and I feel like I can almost see their tracks through the sky. And I couldn't actually see tracks, but I had an intuitive feeling of where they were going next. And this is what can happen as we become more and more intimate with aspects of nature, where the knowledge transforms into an intuitive feeling or understanding of the patterns of nature. Now, if you're a tracker, you may have experienced this for yourself. There's a moment that happens for a lot of trackers where they've really learned all the techniques and the details, and then all of a sudden they look up ahead and there's a path that goes right and left, and they're following a trail, and they somehow know that the animal decided to go straight and veer around that oak tree. And you go up there and you find that sure enough, that's what happened. Another way to conceive of it is to imagine learning letters of a language. And for a long time, you sort of struggle through those letters. Those letters are like, well, the plants, the animals, the tracks, the smell of the wind, all the things that nature puts out for our senses to explore. And at some point, as we are learning to read, we suddenly sort of get it. Those letters come together and they form a word. And it seems magical and miraculous, but it's just that our mind has learned to take these patterns and put them together in meaningful ways. So as I said, I don't feel like I'm there right now, but I have felt some good doses of it at different parts of my life. And I've definitely seen it in some of the forest monks. They would live in the forest long enough that they would really start to feel the patterns of nature and understand it in some really, really cool ways. We have developed, as a species, a tendency to be almost obsessed with our own patterns. You can see it in today's world, where people are apt to spend hours and hours online trying to figure out who's behind everything, if there's masterminds, if our culture is going to collapse, what our political leaders are doing, whatever. How many of us are spending hours and hours outside understanding the patterns of nature? And the funny thing, if you think about it, is that even if all of this does collapse, what is likely to be the last sanctuary? The place where we might go away from the chaos of humanity to find some sanity. Nature? perhaps, the place that we came from, and that eventually this will all likely go back to. So why aren't we spending more time connecting deeply with nature? And part of the reason is that we've just forgotten. We've gotten very good at our technology, but we've largely forgotten how to read this language out here. So today I just want to share with you a message that it is possible to learn this language, and B, to give you a little example of how we can deepen our nature literacy, our communion with nature, our understanding of this world. I'm going to show you why it is aesthetic, how it adds appreciation to our life, and also how it can be practical, even in just a bushcrafty sense. This is one of my favorite places on the land around here, because down in these valleys, there's all of this moss. Moss is easy to overlook. It's just this green stuff, right? But if we get up closer, it's pretty mysterious. If I sit down with it a while, I'll start to notice some things. Like, it seems to create growing space. And I tend to find it down here in the valleys, up in the woodlands to a lesser extent, but it's not really on the fringes and certainly not out in the fields. So what? Now I could just take that observation and say, okay, it grows in one place and not in another. Or I could start to pay some attention to how that moss grows. And I might notice that moss really favors damp conditions. Now once I understand that, I'm going to start to see, well, why is it damper down there in the ravine? Why is it damper in the forest? And I'm going to start to understand, maybe get an inkling, just from observing the moss and its interconnection with everything else that I see, right? I'm trying to take that moss and piece it together, create little connections. I might start to see, this almost points to the thought that the forest creates its own microclimate. And the ravine further creates its own microclimate. This becomes practical. If I'm thinking of camping out, then do I want to be out in the field? Do I want to be in the forest where it is more moist, but also perhaps cooler? Do I want to be down in that ravine where it's very moist and very cool? Depending on what the temperature is outside, whether I'm roasting hot and I need coolness, or I'm a little chilly and I want to find someplace warm. Now I have an understanding, a basic understanding of nature, that there are these different microclimates, in that I can be warmer or cooler, not just by traveling south for hundreds of miles or north for hundreds of miles, but sometimes just by taking a few steps in a different direction. On the forest floor, there's a riot of life pushing up through the soil. I might not even notice this if I'm not tuned into my environment. I might look and say, oh, the ground looks brown like it always does, until later on it sort of gets green. But if I start to notice all that life, I'm going to notice, well, in this case, all kinds of wild edibles that are coming up that are delicious and nutritious. But I don't have to stop there. I can sit down with one of these plants. This is Spring Beauty. And if I sit down here for a while and really pay attention to this plant, I might start to notice some things. Wonder if you guys can hear the horse and buggy coming by. This might be a good time to explain some of how we make these connections. Because there's a lot of people talking about, well, here's how to identify such and such a plant. And here is what you can do with it and its medicinal uses and its edible uses. But there's also a feeling and a personality to a lot of these plants, especially if we start to consider how they might be tied in with the rest of the environment. If I've paid attention to the spring beauty over time, I will have noticed that it comes up in the spring. And it tells me something about when the earth is warm, and it tells me something about light. Because these spring ephemerals, they only last for a little while. They really love the light. They're light dependent. And as soon as the canopy above begins to fill out, then they're not going to get their light anymore. And they put all their life back down into their roots. Now, these are things I could learn from books on ecology. And they're also things that we can learn just from paying attention and watching season after season how things work. You're going to notice one year that the spring beauties have come up in one area and a tree falls and it shades some of them. And how do those spring beauty do down there? How much do they really need the light? We can start answering some of those questions for ourselves as we start to really tune in and explore and watch and observe the natural world. Now I've taken one plant and I've connected it with the soil and how warm the soil is. And I've connected it with light. And I've connected it with the trees and the canopy overhead. I've started to create a little bit of a sentence, or at least a word, by taking these different letters and putting them together. This is the beginning of it. It asks us to just take a deeper look at whatever it is that we observe in nature and ask, how is it interconnected with the things around it, or maybe things that aren't right around it, as is the case with, well, way down here on the ground, the spring beauty, and way up there, the leaves on the tops of the trees. To harken back to the moss, once I've made those observations about moss and moisture, I start to perhaps make some observations about moisture and how it affects other creatures in the forest. There's the famous thoughts about moss on one side of a tree or not. I could show you one down here where the moss is at least obeying the assumption a little bit, with less on the south side, more on the north side. At the same time, that little bit of wisdom about where the moss grows on a tree can lead me astray if I don't realize that the moss is not really concerned about north or south so much as about moisture. All other conditions being the same, the south is going to tend to get more sunlight than the north, and the north will be, well, moister. But of course, in the forest and in nature in general, all conditions are not always the same. And it may be that another tree's shade, or a boulder or a hill, is shading the southern part of a tree and giving it a very robust growth of moss on the south. And then, because I don't have that nature literacy, that communion, that understanding, I'm heading in the wrong direction. Here I'm seeing how moss is loving these dead trees. Is it a decomposer? Or does it just favor things that are more sponge-like and holding moisture? That might lead me into exploring decay a little bit and wondering what these little strings are running through the dead wood. Follow those carefully enough and I might find that they have something to do with mushrooms and how mushrooms interact with the forest. Nature then is not this amalgamation of all these separate things. but it's all interconnected. It truly is a web. Now, just as we have to be aware of the tendency for humans to create patterns, let's say online, to explain whatever social ills we are facing. So when we go out into nature, well, we're humans, and we may have a tendency to create patterns that aren't there, or to make assumptions that might not be quite right. And that's why there's a beauty and a value in always questioning our own ideas, our own assumptions. Those can be the toughest to question. It's one thing to just absorb somebody else's ideas and accept those as gospel. But once we make the idea our own, then it's doubly difficult to look at it carefully. But here's the cool thing. Once we start doing this, it's fun. We start to become less attached to our ideas or really coming to a conclusion, and more attached to the mystery, the unfolding journey, the exploration. We start to explore that decayed log, and it can take us on a many hour, many day, even a lifelong journey. Some scientists have devoted their lives now to understanding the mycorrhizal relationships where trees and fungi are interacting in ways that we're just beginning to understand. These mysteries, they're all over the place out here in nature. This used to be our life. Our ancestors, this language was what they spoke because it was integral to every moment of their living. Now, it can add a lot of fun to our lives. It can inspire our curiosity. And again, as I said, if the world does fall apart, you're going to be way ahead of the game if you know how to read the language of nature and commune with this environment. The possibilities are endless, my friends. The birds can warn us of other predators or people in the woods. The squirrels, they can lead us to where the best hazelnuts are. The bears, they can tell us about berry patches. There's so much if we just learn to open ourselves, to listen. And those are the thoughts for the day, my friend. Just asking this question of what pattern exploration is really valuable for us to spend our lives on, our time on. And there's patterns all around us, patterns of behavior in those we love, patterns of nature like we've been exploring today. Those may be more worthy of our attention than the patterns of the latest internet sensation telling us who or what is happening in our human institutions. So share with me, my friends, how well do you feel you can read the language of nature right now? And are you striving to understand it more fully? Share some of the things that you've noticed in the last couple of years in your encounters with nature. What have you learned that maybe surprised you about how things interact with each other? I want to finish by saying that I think it's really, really cool, the community that we've forged here. Some of you have been here a long time, and others of you, well, you might be new here. If you are new here, I would urge you to explore the comments of these videos, because what I say is just scratching the surface. There's so much wisdom in sharing that goes on in the comments. And the more you interact in those comments, the more those stories unfold and we can all learn from each other. So thank you for sharing. Thank you for being part of this community with me. Thank you for sharing your love of nature and life and exploration. It's wonderful to be on this journey with you. Love to you all, and we'll talk with you in the comments. There is a ninja level perception test that I've dropped between here and the beginning of the video. It is not the question of who was staring at you, it's something else. So if you can catch that ninja level, again, this is a really tough one, awareness challenge, let me know in the comments.